I'm Stephen Hicks, and my guest today is Professor Jerry Kirkpatrick. He's a professor of international business at California State Polytechnic University in Pomona. And he specializes in marketing, and he's written a book called In Defense of Advertising, and so we're here today to talk with him about some of the themes of his book. Now, as the title of your book suggests, you think advertising is a healthy and productive part of a market economy. And so your primary project is to defend it against some standard criticisms that are leveled against advertising.
Yeah, that's right. It's almost seems like there's an endless stream of criticisms that people have made against advertising over the years. It's kind of like advertising is the point man of capitalism, which is why I have I'm defending it, and my subtitle has capitalism in it.
Right.
And the advertising I view as just simply the production of consumer awareness. It is a form of production, creating information and sending it out to the marketplace in a mass sort of way, as opposed to information that might be communicated by, say, a sales rep.
Mm.
Now, the criticisms that people have made against advertising, I think I say in my book that it's only limited by, the number of criticisms are limited only by the creativity of the critics.
Mm.
But what I've done is...
And their effectiveness at advertising, though.
Right. I have tried to consolidate all these criticisms and bring them down into basically three broad categories. There are traditionally two categories that are called the social and economic criticisms.
Mm-hmm.
Very early in my graduate school career, I realized the social ones at root were philosophic. One of the, I think it was actually the first working title of my book was A Philosophic and Economic Defense of Advertising.
Mm.
So these so-called social criticisms are really at root philosophical. And so what we have on that philosophic side or social side are the criticisms that say that advertising is coercive, it forces people to buy products they don't need or want.
Mm.
It says that advertising is offensive, offensive to good taste. Just obnoxious and repetitive to the point of torture. Mm. With the then follow-up implication that if it's so offensive and bad, we should do something about it, like regulate it or ban it. And then under the economic side of things, huge literature in economics criticizing advertising that has said that advertising is a tool of monopoly power by erecting barriers to market entry. And that it also increases prices, which everyone tends to point out. Just look at the industry, $150 billion a year spent on advertising. Look at Bayer Aspirin, all this money they spend on advertising. Obviously, what happens to that? It gets put into the price of the product and raises prices.
Right, or that money could be spent on something else.
Right.
Now, let's talk through these categories of criticism. The first broad category is the coercion criticism. The argument here is that advertising, in some senses, is manipulating the audience, right? So, they have various desires, but the advertiser comes along and changes the focus of their desires and makes them want to buy things that ordinarily they wouldn't.
Yep.
Be
the advertiser just goes out and grabs them around the throat,
right,
and stuffs the product.
And an extreme version of this is the claims about a subliminal advertising, for example.
Yeah.
So, what do you say about the manipulative kind of argument?
Okay, it doesn't manipulate, and the subliminal advertising is very old. It goes, I mean, the charge of it goes back to the 1950s, where a promoter supposedly in a movie theater in New Jersey had the words "eat popcorn and drink Coca-Cola" flashed on a screen at a speed of about 1/3000th of a second, which is, in other words, a speed that no one can see or perceive. I should say subliminal means below or beneath the threshold of perception. The lemon is the threshold, sub means below. So these are words that were on the screen we couldn't see, and supposedly the sales of popcorn and Coca-Cola went up during intermission. The problem is that since that time, that has been exposed as a hoax, that particular thing. Psychologists and marketing professors have done a lot of research on the influence of subliminal effects on behavior and find there is none. There are things that are subliminal. Like it's possible to touch your skin in a subliminal way such that you don't really feel it or perceive it. But it has almost no effect. It's just maybe a little bit area around your hand. The blood will get a little excited, but that's about it. It cannot make us go out and buy popcorn. later version of the subliminal charge was Wilson Bryan Key, who wrote a bunch of books. His most famous couple of examples was taking a look at the ice cubes in a Gilbey's gin glass. It was an ad for Gilbey's gin, and he said he saw the word sex spelled out there, vertically, S-E-X. And another one was Howard Johnson's restaurant menu at one time had clam plate special on the cover in full color, and he said he saw a sexual orgy going on there. So this is what's called subliminal embeds. Well, again, those things are one thing about Mr. Key, or Professor Key, is that he actually said it in one of his books that most of his students don't see these things until he points them out to them. And so the conclusion there is that it's just a very vivid imagination, kind of like seeing all kinds of things in the clouds. The facts from the real world of Madison Avenue, advertisers don't have time for that kind of stuff. They spend all kinds of energy trying to get consumers to pay attention to things that are blatantly obvious. Never mind things that are, 0.003 of a second long or embedded such that most people don't even have any clue that that's what's there. It's just factually not done. They just don't force people to do things that way.
Setting aside to say the subliminal claim, is it possible to soften the criticism but still have some weight to it? If we said, for example, that we do know that human psychology is very complicated, and we do know that advertisers do hire expert psychologists, and so they can be tweaking us or influencing us or nudging us in directions that we're not necessarily fully aware of. So if we didn't go whole hog with the subliminal claim, is there anything to that sort of a charge?
Well, advertising clearly is trying to influence us.
Sure.
And it tries to identify what consumers will associate together, and so that gets put into ads so that we will become aware of it.
Okay.
That's one of the most important roles of advertising, is to make us aware of the products in particular, or things that are associated with it. Now, the thing that, there are a lot of myths about advertising and how it works. The late David Ogilvy said that you use sex to sell sex-related objects. As he put it, draping a voluptuous female model over the hood of a car is not how to sell cars, because it's not specifically related to that.
Is the distinction you're making between a manipulation and an influence?
Yes.
That, as you put it, the advertisers are trying to influence us, but the assumption then still is that we are in the driver's seat, so to speak, as consumers.
Yes.
Whereas the charge, if stated strongly, is that advertisers are trying to manipulate us, which means we are more passive and putty in their hands.
Right.
Is there a kind of volition versus environmental determinism argument here?
To get down to the real philosophical basis. What these arguments do not acknowledge is that there is such a thing as free will or volition. You said environmental determinism, that there are things outside of us, outside of our control, that influence us and make us do things. No, they don't. It still has to be processed up in our heads and by the gray cells to make a decision whether or not to accept it and be influenced by it, or whether to reject it.
Right, so if I like voluptuous females and I see them draped over a car, I'm still in the driver's seat, so to speak.
Yes.
I'm not necessarily robotically going to go out and buy that brand of car. Okay.
Right.
All right, now another variation of the coercion argument is associated with John Kenneth Galbraith, called the dependence effect. And here it's not simply a matter of manipulating pre-existing desires in this direction or that, but rather instilling new desires in us. So in effect, the advertiser is creating the demand for the product that he then wants to sell. In some sense, then Galbraith concludes that we're being made dependent upon, or our desires are being dependent upon kind of manufactured desires, and then we end up spending our money on things that we don't really need, so to speak.
Which is not terribly different from the other argument, because Galbraith is presupposing or assuming that we don't really have any volitional control over what we do. Now, I would say that no, advertising does not create desires, does not create demand, does not create needs or wants. All of those come from within the consumer. What advertising can do is make us aware of needs. It can then stimulate wants and demand. but it doesn't create them. So.
What if I try some counterexample? I mean, a personal example I'm always aware of is anytime one of my colleagues or friends gets a new generation computer and mine is a year or two outdated, I suddenly feel like I really need a new computer, and I'm then all ready to spend money to upgrade.
Yeah.
Now, Galbraith's criticism would be until you knew about that new model, you didn't need it, and so it was the information that generated this new need in you.
Yeah.
But you want to parse that out differently.
Yeah, I do. The needs are always there. A need is a requirement for improved life, the requirements to improve our lives, and that leaves it really quite wide open. We have needs for all kinds of things, and it's better. Improved technology comes along, it's going to improve our lives. So the 2-year new computer is something that is potentially can improve your life.
Sure.
And it is natural then for people to want to pursue those things, assuming they've got the money and so forth.
Okay. So another example I sometimes think about is music, that music groups are always coming up with new songs, and you don't know about them until you first hear them. Right. But then as soon as it's advertised or you hear a clip, then you have a strong desire to go and purchase that piece of music. All right. But there, I'm not being manipulated. I am being made aware of
that's not
a new value in the world.
Right, that's not manipulation. That's just creating awareness.
Okay.